there's this thing called the internet that has come along in the last 30 years. I love telling audiences that, I used to do marketing before we had the internet, and you could just see people going like their heads are, the wheels are turning like, well, like how? What did you do? So obviously that's a biggie, but I'm glad you mentioned what hasn't changed, because in a lot of ways, the fundamentals of what we're trying to do, we're trying to get somebody who has a need to know, like, and trust us enough that they will get out their wallet or credit card or whatever it is to engage us to do something for them or to buy a product that we sell. That has never changed. Obviously we have all these new platforms. We have certainly more ways to engage, go direct, to audiences that we didn't have. But I like to tell people that, often the thing that's changed the most that I don't think people pay enough attention to is the way people buy.
They said getting started was the hardest part, but no one told you how hard it is to scale a custom service business. It's time for your team to step up, but your clients want you. Discover how to scale to 7 figures and beyond by freeing up time and getting your team to run whole parts of the company so you can focus on scaling profits. This is the Hands Off CEO with Mandy Ellefson.
Hello, this is Mandy Ellefson, host of the Hands Off CEO podcast. Today on the podcast, we have John Jantsch from Duct Tape Marketing. Welcome to the show, John.
Well, thanks for having me. Great to catch up with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the first time you've been on the Hands Off CEO podcast. I'm not sure how that's happened. I know we've known each other for a number of years, and we've been on your podcast and even had a chance to.
And you've got a book coming out too, don't you? So I'm going to have you back. I'm going to have you back on my podcast.
I know. I'm really excited about that. I was looking at some of the things that John's been doing recently with their Duct Tape Marketing community, and I know you and Sarah really are doing some great work there. I reached out to John because I wanted him to share this because there's such a cool angle here in how they're helping marketing consultants and marketing agencies to be able to really stand out as strategists. So I'd love to hear more about what you're doing right now with that.
Well, you bet. So, I built an agency, using my methodology, Duct Tape Marketing. We still run an agency, but about 15 years ago, especially when my first book came out, we started getting a lot of inquiries from other agencies, other consultants saying, hey, I read your book. I love the methodology. I want to license it. And so for really about the past 10 or 12 years, we've been licensing consultants, agencies, business owners to use our methodology to work with small businesses. Our approach has always been strategy before tactics. And really every engagement in our agency, when somebody comes to us and says, oh, I want a website, or I want SEO, or I want Facebook ads, or whatever they think of that day, we say, yes, we do those. But first, we're going to go through strategy. And it's a very set process that we've refined over the years that I kind of laughingly refer to it almost as a product. But the couple reasons that we do that and why it's been such a potent approach. Number one is it's the right approach. People should always start with strategy instead of just saying, oh, I want to do this thing this week and this thing next week. But the other thing it does for us as an agency is it changes us from being a provider, a vendor, whatever they might call it, to really being a trusted advisor, because we're asking them questions and we're running them through things that nobody's ever asked them to do, that nobody's ever been able to kind of shed a light on for them. And so at the end of that 30, 45 day, kind of initial engagement that we call strategy first, they literally are saying, oh, okay, we've got a plan now. Like, how can you make this happen? So there's no like, give me a proposal or, what's this going to be about? We literally go from strategy to turning into a trusted advisor to then just having a long-term, much higher probably fee engagement than we would get if we just took whatever they came to us with. So, having the right message, having the right price, quite frankly, and the right system, together allows us to really do work that's 60, 70% margin, with an ideal client who is what I call an investor, who's investing in their business. And so it really allows us then to scale and add people and delegate, because we've got a system. I mean, it's what you teach in other aspects of the business that, has really kind of allowed us to create this model. I have started calling it recently that we're licensing our fractional CMO system. We haven't called it that until the last couple of years, but in effect, that's what we've been doing, but it's probably a little different approach in I think we've figured out how to scale that model, by having this repeatable system and having a scope over fractional CMO, what it actually means. Because I think, there are a lot of people out there that have been doing that model for a while, but, they can work with 3 or 4 clients because they're essentially selling their time, to those 3 or 4 clients. And I think we've kind of cracked the nut on a hybrid approach that says, no, you can go to the small business with this positioning and you can actually scale it. We have people that use our system that are working with, 18, 20 clients.
Well, and what I love about what you shared here is that, what we haven't mentioned is you've been doing this for 30 years.
Yeah.
So you've been seeing all sorts of changes in the market, which I want to talk about. Actually, I'm really curious about that. But you have standardized something that it took you 30 years to create.
Right.
And the reason why these fractional CMOs have to be almost like part-time employees for these companies is because they haven't gone through and put together a framework like you have.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, they essentially are selling, you can have a fourth of my time. So I'm going to sit in on the meetings and I'm going to do this. And I mean, the trap of the fractional CMO is that if you go in as a traditional CMO, they're still going to want all your time, because there's always more to do. Right. And so, the real key, as simple as it sounds, is to have a scope. Here's what it means. I mean, too many people go in and it's like, what do you need? I'll show up for everything, and so that obviously will not scale.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great way to start though, because that's how you learn how to generate results. But you've already done the legwork, so someone can come and plug into your system and then immediately start doing engagements. I think you were sharing that the price point that you can do these initial engagements for. Did you want to share that?
Yeah, I mean, we have people every day that are now doing this initial engagement for $7,500 to $10,000. And so it's not for everybody, not every business owner, is going to sit still for that. But the good news is it's for the right client. It's the client you want, that really, because somebody who's going to pay that much for a strategic engagement, even if they don't fully understand, what they're getting, they realize they have to invest in their business. It's a long-term game. Marketing's not an event. And so it does a couple things, You've got somebody who is willing to pay that kind of money, who understands the long-term, approach, and really over time, you're going to be able to get them the best solution as well, because, we should start with strategy.
Yeah, I love that. So I'd love to hear from you, John. What are some of the things that you've seen change over the last 30 years in the marketing industry, and what things have stayed the same?
Well, there's this thing called the internet that has come along in the last 30 years. I love telling audiences that, I used to do marketing before we had the internet, and you could just see people going like their heads are, the wheels are turning like, well, like how? What did you do? So obviously that's a biggie, but I'm glad you mentioned what hasn't changed, because in a lot of ways, the fundamentals of what we're trying to do, we're trying to get somebody who has a need to know, like, and trust us enough that they will get out their wallet or credit card or whatever it is to engage us to do something for them or to buy a product that we sell. That has never changed. Obviously we have all these new platforms. We have certainly more ways to engage, go direct, to audiences that we didn't have. But I'd like to tell people that, often the thing that's changed the most that I don't think people pay enough attention to is the way people buy. Marketing certainly has changed in terms of its platforms and tools and technology. But the thing, how people acquire things, is really what's changed. And that's the thing that we have to focus on the most. That's why I spend so much time talking about the customer journey, because, many of the ways in which people now, find and make decisions about the companies they're going to do business with, we don't even see. I mean, it's like out of our, view, maybe somewhat out of our control. And so obviously this idea of creating an end-to-end customer journey is something that we have to focus on really every one of the stages that our ideal client goes through when making a decision.
I love that. It makes me think about, I actually pulled out your Duct Tape Marketing book, and this copy, you signed this. When I came to your event with your duct tape consults, I remember you signing this. So watching the video, you can see this. And I told this story, so you remember this story, but obviously our listeners haven't. But this was one of the first marketing books that I read as a web designer, and I was getting into branding. And I recognized that I was doing all these tactical things.
Right.
And I was recognizing that I really wanted to help our clients actually make more money, not just put out a website. So I read this book and I was seriously interested in becoming a consultant. And looking back, it was really dumb that I didn't, honestly. This was 15 years ago. I had a 1-year-old baby at the time. And I remember reading that book. And I bring up this book because if you look through this book, these are all timeless things that are still relevant.
Yeah.
Which is saying something in the marketing space with so much change.
Yeah. I'm sure there were other people doing it, but at the time, right when this book came out, we were really transitioning from the internet being a serious marketing tool, for small business. And so I think I was doing some things in terms of creating content and, focusing on, SEO and some of the things that were coming that are still, like you said, some of the little details have changed, but the fundamentals of what we're trying to do, that was good marketing in 2007, and it's good marketing still today.
Right. So how would you recommend companies consider the balance between, the old school tried and true that will always work, the fundamentals, and the newer emerging technologies the newer emerging strategies that are driven with new technologies?
I mean, there's even businesses. I have a client that I've worked with forever. I'm still the only client I work with just because, I'm on like the second generation of ownership, and it's just kind of the thing I like to do. I mean, they're old school as can be. They're a remodeling contractor. They only work in their community. All of their contracts are, pretty much done in the home and, or across the desk. I mean, it's still pretty old school. But, I really got them to embrace content there. I'm sure they were one of the first remodeling contractors in the country, if not the world, that was blogging. And so, I got them to really embrace this idea of educational content. Sure, it attracted people, it attracted search engines, but it's also just a very useful thing to do for prospective clients. And so, now today, I mean, they have grown, in leaps and bounds. And so, they're on Instagram and they're, running, paid ads on Facebook, and they're using all of this, the technologies that allow them to reach the audience, as big as they, possibly can. But they're still driving the fundamentals, back to the fact that there's good, useful, information, good, useful content. They obviously, are able to share a process that creates an incredible customer experience. They use a lot of these new tools to actually promote what a great place it is to work, which then in turn, makes it easy for them in an industry that is really, really hit hard in terms of labor. It's actually made it very easy for them to attract, the cream of the crop talent. So, these things go that you mentioned, both the kind of newer tools go hand in hand to not replace the same, having a great culture and, having the things that make it a great business. They just supplement it. They allow you to reach farther and deeper into an audience that you're already serving well.
I love that distinction that you added there too, because it's not just about marketing for new customers, but one of their biggest choke points in their company is actually having the talent to do the services, which is a huge problem in the blue collar space.
Absolutely.
And it's a very unique approach to be able to apply the same principles for attracting new clients to be able to attract in the right kind of team.
Absolutely. And it's, a lot of people wait until they have a position they need to fill, and then they go try to fill it. You think about growth and talent acquisition as a pipeline, then, it's no different than, trying to acquire new customers. It's the same idea. The beauty of a message that talks about, employer branding is kind of the term we're using today to apply to that. Talking about sharing what a great, well, obviously it's got to be real, but sharing what a great place it is to work, is also a really positive marketing message. I mean, wouldn't you want to hire the remodeling contractor that has happy employees, that do great work? So it's really, they go very, very much hand in hand.
I really like what you shared there about that employer branding. That's a whole other aspect of marketing that really is important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And particularly today, in today's environment, I mean, it's like you have buyers markets and sellers markets. Well, it's an employees market right now. I mean, they can leave your organization, without the fear of, of being unemployed because there's somebody down the street that wants them. And so, they're paying a lot of attention these days to, what it is, where they work and what it's like to work at that organization.
That is a very unique approach. I'm glad you brought that up. And I do recognize that so many people will say that there's just not enough good talent out there. And it's just not the case. There's plenty of good talent. You just have to have good processes to be able to sort, and good processes and that employer branding, like you're mentioning, that really attracts in the cream of the crop.
That's right.
So that you have this massive funnel of people to be coming into your organization. And the way I would see it is that if you don't have your potential candidates coming to your calls eager, who've looked through your website and who've said, I want to work here, tell me how I can make this. I love what you guys are doing. If you're not hearing those kind of comments on your interviews, you're not doing something right.
That's right. Yeah. And some of it can actually be, a culture issue, a, process issue internally, but some of it's you're just maybe not getting the word out as well. I mean, they go hand in hand. That's why, a lot of the organizations that we're working with that are service organizations, I mean, we're trying to tell their people stories, as thoroughly in marketing as we're telling their customer stories.
Ooh, I love that. What a great takeaway. So I want to talk about a lot of the kind of companies that your certified program, remind me again what you guys call it, your Duct Tape Marketing Consultant Network.
Correct.
That you serve. So if someone is starting a marketing advising company, maybe they want to be a fractional CMO, maybe they have a company that has been getting some traction, but they still are finding themselves very stuck in it and doing a lot of the tactical types of things and not delivering at the level that they'd really like to. What would you advise them to do to be able to get to the next level in their business?
Well, I mean, the easy button is to license our system, right? That's the obvious answer. But what we always tell people, there are kind of three things that have to go hand in hand. You have to have the right package. You can't just go to the market and say, what do you need? We're digital marketers. That means we can do anything, right? So what's the package? Meaning that I solve a very specific problem for a very specific type of client in a very specific way. That's the package, right? And then you've got to be able to price that thing in such a way in the service business that you're 60, 70% profit margin, because what that then allows you to do is take a repeatable system that you create or again, license, and you're able to now have the margin to delegate and train and bring in folks to actually do the work. Because what happens to so many agencies is they start getting pretty good at getting clients, but the owner of the business looks around and says, I'm working harder than ever and I'm making less than ever, because I'm scaling sideways. I'm adding people maybe to the team and I'm adding clients, but it's not really taking us anywhere. And so by having this repeatable system that you can actually train and delegate and quite frankly, get work done that doesn't have to be done by you anymore is how you actually effectively scale, vertically, which is what people are trying to do, but struggle with so much. It's the right package, it's the right price, and it's the right system, all working in concert to really grow your business.
I love that. So I have had the great opportunity to come and see firsthand, really impressive, the community that you've built. The reason why I would say this is, we've had some of the same clients, some clients that have gone through your program, they've elevated, they've gotten to a point where they actually can come in and bring things to the next level at hands-off CEO. We're typically working with $1 million plus agencies. But one thing that I hear from them is that, first of all, we found out very quickly that we need to make sure that our events did not overlap with your events because there was no way that they were missing your events. And the level of dogged determination that it took that they had to come to your events, first of all, is admirable. Second of all, I want to know what your secret sauce is to make that happen. And I hear such great things that they are staying around for a long time, that they feel very engaged in the community. What is it about this network that is working so well?
I think it's a little bit like, I was talking about we're attracting the right ideal client, by going with strategy before tactics. I mean, and I think there's a little bit of that to who is attracted to, this program, especially as we've started positioning it as a fractional CMO program. It's attracting people that have a level of experience, that have a level, that believe strategy, has to come first, that they want to serve their clients that way. So I think that's one of the first things. We're just attracting people that, are kind of like-minded. There's no secret sauce for me. I mean, what happens is they get together and they help each other and they thrive, as a community themselves. And I mean, we just try to not get in the way because I mean, they stay because of the community. I mean, we have people that have been in the network for 12, 13 years. It's really, they will tell you that, it's not because of me. It's because of the group and the community.
Mm-hmm. That's what I've heard from multiple people. And
Yeah.
They're getting together, they're co-creating, co-branding types of assets and resources and just really supporting each other to get to this next level. And so I love the community that you're building, and anyone who's listening that is interested in bringing the next level and maybe their company is at this place that we're talking about, I would highly recommend that you look at this certification program because it allows you to be able to step up to a whole new level in your business. And I am a firm believer in investing ahead. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I have made earlier on is one of the things that I mentioned is just like not investing in myself early enough and investing very shallow. It really came from a lack of confidence. It took me a little while to think about that because it was from the perspective of like, well, you know what? I can invest in that if I get to that level of success. But no, that's what gets you to that next level. So
Right.
I'd love to hear from you. You looking back at your 30-year career in this, what would you do different?
Probably some of the same things, investing in some things earlier. One of my daughters started a business and I'm always so impressed. She's actually sold it, an agency, did incredibly well. And I was always very taken by from day one, she was like, no, we're going to get the branding right. We're going to, I'm going to pay for this person I can't afford, because we need that role to do it right. And I was much more of a hustler, let's see if I can go this direction and that direction. And, this opportunity presents itself. And, I probably wish I would have been a little more structured for growth early on. But, again, that it's easy in hindsight, to look back and say what you do different, isn't it?
It is. And it sounds like your daughter may have had a little bit of an advantage where she's standing on the shoulders of a giant.
She saw all my mistakes and learned from that.
Well, and maybe you found the same thing, but at Hands Off CEO, we've just come to another place where, the next stage of growth has required a lot of investment. We've made a lot of hires in a short amount of time. And there's a leap of faith that comes into that. And, even hiring where you're like, we don't yet have the cash flow to be able to support this, but we're going to figure it out. And then, sure enough, you take those next steps and everything that you need, all those resources just show up. And then those investments you've made then go take you to the whole next level. And I see that again and again in my business. Is that something that you've seen too?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I mean, I think if nothing, obviously there are smart investments that you're making, but I think there's also this intention. It's like, I'm doing this because here's where we're going. I mean, and there is something that sort of magically takes you there, because of that stated intention, back with action.
The intention back with action. I love that. Well, John, is there any questions that I didn't ask that I should have asked?
Well, some people might be wondering, if anybody's interested in our licensing program, they might be wondering, like, how does it work? What are the logistics? So the process starts with a 3-day certification intensive. We do them about every 60 days. So, just like it sounds, you spend 3 days. We're doing them. We're not back doing them in person yet. We're still doing them over Zoom calls. And then you go into kind of a 90-day incubator period because we want to make sure that you are able to attract clients and convert clients and fulfill in this very specific thing that we've certified you to do. And really then at that point, you can decide if you want to stick around and join our network, which, then you'll go into mastermind groups and you'll go into, specific training on tactics and things that we do on an ongoing basis as well. Depending upon when people listening to these, like I said, we do them about every 60 days. So if you just check out ducttapemarketing.com, you'll see the little button for license our system, and you can get all the details there.
Great. Well, that sounds fascinating. And I love hearing about your process for how to do that. I love marketing, I love sales, but I also love the processes behind it because they're all connected. And if you can't really separate any of them, but I love to hear how the mechanics work for what you're doing. So
yeah, well, I appreciate that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, John, I know you shared your website, ducttapemarketing.com. Is there any other places that you might want to direct anyone to here listening?
Well, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Again, it's Duct Tape Marketing on LinkedIn as well. But yeah, you can pretty much find anything that I've been doing the last couple decades at ducttapemarketing.com as well.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, John. I really appreciate you coming and sharing your decades of wisdom. It's been really a pleasure to have you.
Well, thanks, Mandy.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Hands Off CEO with Mandy Ellefson. If you want to work less and make more, make sure you subscribe and get a new episode every week, and help spread the word by leaving a review.